The lace of my wedding dress didn't feel like silk. It felt like a cold, wet shroud. I stood in the middle of my own reception, smiling for the cameras, while the copper taste of my own blood filled my mouth. Just 3 minutes ago, I found a stolen ultrasound photo tucked into my bouquet. It wasn't mine. In exactly 20 minutes, at the stroke of midnight, the prenuptial agreement I just signed locks me out of my family's fortune forever. And that's if I even live that long. My husband, Michael, is currently pressing his thumb into the soft skin of my wrist so hard I can feel my pulse fading. He just whispered that my honeymoon accident has been moved up to tonight. I looked at my maid of honor for help, but then I saw it. The exact same birthmark on her neck as his. They aren't lovers. They're blood. And the man I thought was my lawyer on the other end of this phone, that's his father. I am standing in a room of 100 guests, and every single exit is locked. Let me take you back to the moment I realized my wedding wasn't a celebration. It was an execution. The heavy silk of the wedding gown felt less like a garment and more like a shroud. Sarah Johnson stood in the center of the bridal suite, the air thick with the cloying, oily scent of gardenia perfume that seemed to have been baked into the very fibers of the carpet. It was a suffocating sweetness that coated the back of her throat, making every breath feel like she was swallowing liquid lead. She reached out to the mahogany vanity, her fingers instinctively aligning the silver-backed brushes so they sat in perfectly parallel lines. 3,102. That was the number of apologies she had recorded in her leather-bound ledger since she was 8 years old. Today, she feared, would require an entry so large it would break the binding. Her gaze drifted to the silver-framed photograph sitting atop the lace runner. It was a picture of her and Michael from their engagement party, but someone had taken a razor to it. Her own face had been neatly, surgically removed. The jagged edges of the velvet backing behind the hole stared back at her like an empty eye socket. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a frantic drumming that worsened as she reached for her bridal clutch. Tucked deep inside the silk lining, hidden behind a compact, was the ultrasound photo she had found tucked under her pillow an hour ago. There was no name on it, only a date from 3 months prior, the morning Michael had proposed. The suspicion that had been a dull ache in her chest for weeks sharpened into a jagged blade. Michael's fidelity wasn't just a question anymore. It was a crime scene. She needed proof, something more than a grainy image of a womb that wasn't hers. She moved to the closet where Michael's tuxedo jacket hung, waiting for the ceremony. Her hands shook as she fumbled through the pockets, her silk gloves sliding over the fine wool. Her fingers snagged on something hard and rectangular. A burner phone, a cheap plastic slab that felt alien against the luxury of the room. She tucked it into the hidden pocket of her gown, the weight of it dragging at the lace. The wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a facade, a beautifully constructed stage set, and she was the only one who didn't know the script. She stepped out of the suite, the high-frequency electronic buzz from the estate's perimeter security pylons vibrating through the soles of her shoes. It was a sound that made her teeth ache, a localized migraine that hummed in the very marrow of her bones. As she descended the grand staircase, she began the count. 1, 2, 3. She wasn't just walking. She was measuring the distance to the floor, a habit she'd picked up from Chloe, her maid of honor. Chloe always said that if you knew how many steps there were, you knew exactly how long it would take to fall. The reception hall was a cavern of oppressive grandeur. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, looking less like light fixtures and more like jagged ice formations waiting to drop and crush the guests below. The industrial AC had been cranked down to a bone-chilling 58 degrees. Sarah watched as the breath of the guests misted in the air, 100 tiny ghosts rising from laughing mouths. She scanned the crowd, her eyes searching for the flash of Chloe's blonde bob. Chloe, who had been her shadow for a decade. Chloe, who might be carrying the child of the man Sarah was about to swear her life to. A shadow detached itself from the floral arrangements near the exit. Jack Wilson, her cousin, stood with his arms crossed over his chest, his rugged features set in a grim mask. He didn't offer a smile. He never did. As Sarah approached, he leaned in, the scent of cold wind and tobacco clinging to his wool coat. He began to hum, a low, mournful funeral dirge that made the hair on Sarah's arms stand up. "The catering truck," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible over the string quartet. "It's parked sideways across the main drive. They've got the service entrance blocked with 2 black SUVs. There's no way to get the Volvo out, Sarah. We're boxed in." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The security wasn't there to keep the paparazzi out. It was there to keep her in. The iron gates of the Charlottesville estate had no handles on the inside. She was a prisoner in a white dress, surrounded by 200 guests who were too busy sipping vintage Veuve Clicquot to notice the bars on the windows. The walls felt like they were leaning in, the silver-clad waiters moving with a robotic, synchronized precision that felt more like a military drill than a service. The tension in the room snapped when a man stumbled toward the buffet, his tuxedo disheveled and his eyes bloodshot. It was Miller, a former client Michael had ruthlessly dismantled in a hostile takeover 6 months ago. He was clutching a magnum of champagne by the neck like a club. "You think you bought a life, Davis?" Miller screamed, his voice cracking against the vaulted ceiling. He lunged toward Sarah, the green glass bottles swinging in a wide, desperate arc. Sarah didn't scream. Her marketing instincts, the cold, analytical part of her brain that could predict a market crash, took over. She saw the trajectory of his stumble, the way his weight shifted onto his left heel. As he swung, she didn't pull back. She stepped into his space, her hand catching the silk of his sleeve and redirecting his momentum. With a sharp, practiced shove, she sent him careening sideways. He hit the centerpiece, a 6-foot-tall ice sculpture of 2 entwined swans, with the sound of a car crash. Shards of frozen water exploded outward, glittering like diamonds in the strobe lights. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that momentarily drowned out the music. In the chaos, as the security team swarmed the fallen man, Sarah felt a heavy weight in the small of her back. Michael was there. He had appeared out of the mist of the AC, his hand firm on her waist. "A bit dramatic for a Saturday, isn't it, darling?" Michael's voice was a smooth, predatory glide. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of the peppermint he used to mask the metallic tang of the scotch he favored. During the scuffle, Sarah had felt his primary phone, the one he actually used for business, slide against her hip. With the dexterity of a pickpocket, she slipped her hand into his pocket as he turned to signal the band to keep playing. Her fingers closed around the cool, brushed metal. She slid it into the folds of her skirt, her heart hammering so hard she feared he could feel it through her ribs. "I need to freshen up," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The ice, it splashed my hem." Michael's grip didn't loosen. Instead, his fingers dug into the soft flesh of her side. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "We aren't really going to play the thief today, are we, Sarah? It's such a pity your memory fails you. I put that photo under your pillow because I wanted to see if you'd have the courage to ask me about it, or if you'd just revert to your difficult nature and start rooting through my things like a common clerk." The world tilted. The anonymous threat, the breadcrumbs of infidelity. It hadn't been a slip-up. It had been a test. A psychological trap designed to see how far she would go to betray him so he could justify the leash he was about to put around her neck. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, her voice a thin, reedy thing. "Phase 1 was the photo," Michael said, his unblinking eyes locking onto hers. "Phase 2 is the dance. And Sarah, give me the phone. You won't like how I take it back if we have to do it in front of the bishop." The music shifted. The quartet transitioned into a slow, haunting waltz. The first dance was being called, and the 4-minute countdown to the activation of the prenuptial agreement began. Michael led her to the center of the black glass floor, his hand a shackle on hers. Subverted beat. 1.4. The trap beyond the trap. Sarah's mind raced as the first notes of the waltz echoed through the hall. She had the phone. She had the evidence. All she had to do was get to the bathroom, lock the door, and send the files to her private server. Michael was smiling, a warm, practiced expression for the photographers. And for a second, Sarah felt a surge of genuine hope. She was smarter than him. She was the accountant of guilt. She knew how to balance the scales. "You're remarkably calm for a woman who just committed a felony," Michael whispered, spinning her gracefully. The flashbulbs of the cameras created a rhythmic, blinding pulse. "I suppose that's why I'm so fond of you. You have grit." Sarah felt a small victory bloom in her chest. He was talking, which meant he was distracted. He thought he was in control, but she had the physical device. She felt the weight of the phone against her thigh, a solid, reassuring presence. She just needed to finish this dance, feign a dizzy spell, and vanish into the corridors. She began to relax her shoulders, letting her head rest on his shoulder as part of the performance. The crisis felt manageable. She would win. "I just want today to be perfect, Michael," she murmured into his lapel. "It will be," he replied. "In fact, it's already going exactly as planned." The crack started small, a tiny electronic chirp from the folds of her own dress. Not the burner phone, not the phone she had just stolen. A third device. Sarah froze. Her hand went to the hidden pocket where she had tucked the burner phone earlier. It was gone. In its place was a small, vibrating disc, no larger than a coin. "Did you really think I'd leave a burner phone in a tuxedo jacket I knew you'd be touching?" Michael's voice lost its warmth, turning into a cold, clinical rasp. He didn't stop dancing. He kept her moving, a puppet on a string. "I needed to know where you'd go if you thought you had a way out. I needed to see which exit you'd head for. Jack's Volvo, a clever choice. But Greg is already pulling the spark plugs." The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow to the stomach. The burner phone hadn't been a source of information, it had been a beacon. By taking it, she had signaled her intent to flee and revealed her only ally. She hadn't outsmarted him. She had walked directly into the center of a web he'd spent months weaving. You planted it," she breathed, her knees turning to water. "I didn't just plant it, Sarah. I recorded your conversation with Jack in the suite. I know about the escape route. I know about the lawyer you think is waiting for your call." Michael leaned in so close their foreheads touched, a gesture that looked like intimacy to the guests, but felt like an interrogation to her. "The phone you just took from my pocket? It's a dummy. It's been wiped. But the fact that you took it, well, that's a breach of the trust clause in the final version of the prenup. The one you're about to sign by default in exactly 3 minutes. You didn't just fail the test, Sarah. You just handed me the legal grounds to strip your father's estate before the cake is even cut. the world seemed to darken around the edges. Sarah looked out at the sea of smiling faces, her friends and family, all of them cheering for her downfall. She had lost her leverage, her ally, and her father's legacy in a single, arrogant move. The trap hadn't just snapped shut. It had been built around her from the moment she woke up. The dance continued, but Sarah was no longer a participant. She was a passenger in her own body, being steered toward a cliff. As they passed the towering wedding cake, a magnificent 5-tier structure of white fondant and silver pearls, she heard a sickening, wet groan of shifting weight. The cake began to lean, a slow-motion disaster that mirrored her own life. With a wet, heavy thud, the top 3 tiers slid off their supports, crashing onto the black glass floor in a heap of mangled sponge and cream. At the same moment, the string of pearls around Sarah's neck, the ones her mother had given her, the ones that were supposed to be her something old, suddenly snapped. The silk thread had been frayed, weakened by a razor's edge she hadn't noticed. The pearls pelted the floor like hail, scattering into the darkness, rolling under the feet of the dancers. "Ominous," Michael remarked, his eyes never leaving hers. "A crumbling tower and a broken chain. It's almost as if the universe is trying to tell you something, darling." "I need to leave," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "Now." "The dance isn't over," Michael said, his grip tightening until her finger bones ground together. "And neither is the merger." She looked toward the hallway, hoping to see Jack, but instead, she saw Greg Thompson. The fixer stood by the mahogany doors, his thick neck straining against his collar, his face a slab of granite. He was tapping the glass of his watch 3 times, then a pause, then 3 times again. It was a countdown. Sarah wrenched herself away from Michael, the sudden movement causing a ripple of confusion among the nearby guests. She didn't care about the optics anymore. She ran toward the secluded corridor that led to the library, her heels clicking a frantic, uneven rhythm on the marble. She needed to reach her phone, her real phone, and call Robert, the family lawyer. He was the only one who could stop the midnight activation. He had been her father's best friend. He would save her. She reached the dark mouth of the corridor, the scent of industrial ammonia and old paper rising to meet her. But before she could reach the library door, a massive hand shot out from the shadows and pinned her against the cold stone wall. Greg didn't say a word at first. He just stood there, his physical presence a wall of meat and malice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small sugar packet. With agonizing slowness, he tore it open and poured the white crystals into a neat pile on his palm. "Mr. Davis doesn't like it when people leave the party early," Greg said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that seemed to come from his chest rather than his throat. "It's rude." "Let me go, Greg. I'm calling the police." Greg laughed, a dry, hacking sound. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. "The police? In this town? Michael owns the dirt they walk on. And as for your honeymoon, the flight to Belize? We've moved the schedule up. Why wait for tomorrow for an accident when the moon is so bright tonight?" He reached out and traced the line of her jaw with a rough, calloused thumb. "A tragic fall from the cliffside trail, a grieving widower, a vast fortune. It's a clean story, Sarah. Don't make me add a chapter about a resisting bride." He stepped back, but he didn't leave. He stood in the center of the hallway, a gargoyle guarding the only path to her salvation. Sarah felt a cold sweat breaking out across her skin. She had to find another way. She turned and ran back toward the powder room, her mind a whirlwind of terror and calculation. She found Chloe there, standing before the mirror, meticulously reapplying her lipstick. The powder room was a sanctuary of silk-covered walls and soft lighting, but the air was thick with the smell of gardenias and sweat. "Chloe," Sarah gasped, clutching the edge of a marble sink. "You have to help me. Michael, he's going to kill me. I know about the affair. I know about the baby. Just take the money and go. Please, just help me get out of here." Chloe didn't turn around. She finished the stroke of red on her lip, then slowly blotted it with a tissue. She began to count the tiles on the wall. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Chloe, listen to me." Chloe finally turned, her wide, innocent eyes reflecting the vanity lights. "You always were so arrogant, Sarah, thinking everything was about a sordid little fling. You think Michael would risk a billion-dollar legacy for a mistress?" She stepped closer, her soft, breathy voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm not his girlfriend, you idiot. I'm his sister. Our father, the great Robert Davis, had a very busy year in 1996. He kept me in the shadows, paid for the schools, the clothes, the silence. But he promised me my share. And the only way the Davis blood gets the Johnson money is if Michael marries it, and then inherits it." The revelation felt like a physical weight pressing down on Sarah's lungs. It wasn't about love or betrayal. It was about biology. A predatory financial scheme designed to keep the wealth within a secret, twisted bloodline. Chloe wasn't the other woman. She was the silent partner in a corporate raid on Sarah's life. "He won't give you anything," Sarah hissed. "Once I'm gone, he'll discard you too." "Maybe," Chloe said, a flicker of something dark crossing her face. "But I'd rather take my chances with my brother than spend another day being your best friend. Now, be a good bride and go back out there. The fireworks are about to start." Sarah backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was surrounded. Every exit was a trap, every friend a foe. She stumbled back into the reception hall, the music reaching a frantic, chaotic crescendo. The strobe lights were a sensory meat grinder, turning the dancing guests into a blur of faceless ghosts. She saw Michael waiting for her at the edge of the dance floor. He held 2 glasses of champagne, the crystal catching the light. He looked like the perfect groom, the hero of a story she had been foolish enough to believe. She reached for her phone, the one she had hidden in her garter. Her fingers found the screen, her thumb flying across the glass. She sent a single, desperate text to Robert, the lawyer. "They're going to kill me. Help. The estate gates are locked." She waited, her breath hitching in her throat. The phone buzzed in her hand. Subverted beat 3.4. The architect's reveal. The relief that washed over Sarah was so intense, it made her lightheaded. Robert was typing. Robert, who had held her at her father's funeral. Robert, who had promised to protect her interests against the Davis family's greed. He was her safety net, her final line of defense. She watched the little gray bubbles on the screen, her heart swelling with a desperate, fragile hope. "It's okay," she told herself. "The law is on my side. Robert will call the state police. He'll break the gates." Asterisk. The message popped up. "Sarah, dear, I've been waiting for you to reach out. I was beginning to think you'd lost your spirit." Sarah frowned. The tone was wrong. Too casual. Too intimate. She started to type back, her fingers shaking. "Robert, please. This isn't a joke. Michael and Chloe." The phone buzzed again before she could finish. "Chloe is a bit high-strung, isn't she? But she has her father's eyes. It's a shame you found the ultrasound. We wanted that to be a surprise for the probate hearing. It adds such a lovely layer of tragedy to the pregnant widow narrative we've prepared for the press. Sarah stopped breathing. The floor seemed to drop away beneath her feet, leaving her suspended in a cold, dark void. She looked at the contact name at the top of the screen. Robert Thompson, Esquire. "You're wondering why I'm telling you this," the next message read. "It's because I've always admired your attention to detail, Sarah. You like to balance the ledgers. So, here is the final entry. I didn't just build Michael's legal shield. I built his bloodline. I am the father he fears, and the father Chloe craves. And you? You are the transaction that settles all our debts. Don't bother calling the police. The sheriff is my godson. Just drink the toast, Sarah. Make it easy for everyone." The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the black glass floor. She looked across the room and saw him. Not the lawyer, but the man behind the curtain. Robert Davis sat in a wheelchair in the shadows of the balcony, his heavy cane resting against his knee. He raised a glass to her, a slow, mocking salute. The betrayal was total. There was no one left to call. Her protector was the architect of her execution. The legal system, the family ties, the very ground she stood on. It was all owned by the man who wanted her dead. She wasn't just trapped in a house. She was trapped in a reality where her death was a preordained line item in a balance sheet. The music stopped. The ballroom lights dimmed to a deep, ominous purple. "Time for the toast, darling," Michael said, appearing at her side like a specter. He handed her a glass. The liquid inside was clear, bubbling with a false cheer. To a long and profitable union. Sarah looked at the glass. She could smell it now. Beneath the yeast and the sugar, there was a faint, bitter almond scent. Cyanide, or something faster. "Drink," Michael urged, his voice a low command. "The fireworks are starting. You wouldn't want to miss the finale." Sarah looked at him, then at Chloe, who was watching from the bar with a predatory grin. She looked at the locked doors, the groomsmen who were actually mercenaries, and the father who had sold her for a legacy. She felt a cold, hard clarity settle over her. The accountant of guilt was dead. In her place was something else. A strategist who had spent her life dismantling reputations. If she was going to die, she wasn't going to do it as a line item. She looked at Michael and did something he didn't expect. She smiled. "You're right, Michael," she said, her voice steady and clear. "We shouldn't keep the guests waiting." She raised the glass, but as she did, she feigned a sudden, violent stagger. "Oh, the lights. I feel..." She collapsed, her body hitting the floor with a practiced, theatrical grace. As she went down, she ensured her gown tangled with Michael's legs, sending him stumbling forward. In the split second of chaos, as the glasses hit the floor and the champagne spilled, Sarah's hands moved with the speed of a card shark. She didn't just swap the glasses. She emptied the small vial of heavy-duty sedative she'd swiped from the catering truck's first aid kit into the magnum sitting on the tray nearby. "Sarah," Michael shouted, reaching for her. She scrambled up, gasping for air. "I'm sorry. The heat. I just need water." "The toast first," Michael hissed, grabbing a fresh glass from the tray, the one she had just spiked. He handed it to Chloe, then took one for himself. "We finish this now." Sarah watched as they raised the glasses. She watched as they drank, the toxic ambition swallowing the toxic reality. She didn't wait for them to fall. She turned and ran, not toward the exits, but toward the catering truck Jack had mentioned. She found it idling in the dark, the metallic rattling of its panels sounding like a symphony of freedom. The driver was gone, likely inside to watch the fireworks. She hopped into the cab, her white dress tearing on the gear shift. She didn't need a key. She knew how these trucks worked. She'd marketed them for 5 years. A quick twist of the wires beneath the dash, a spark that bit into her palm, and the engine roared to life. As she slammed the truck into gear and plowed through the ornamental hedges, the first of the fireworks exploded above the estate. Red, white, and blue bursts illuminated the chaos behind her. She saw Michael staggering on the lawn, his hands clutching his throat as the sedative hit his system, his perfect world spinning into a black void. She reached the roadway, the dark asphalt stretching into the infinite forest. She reached into her bodice and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. The one thing she had kept from her father's private safe. It wasn't a deed or a will. It was the contract for the priest who had performed the ceremony. She looked at the name, Lawrence Smith, a disbarred actor she had found in a dive bar in Richmond a month ago. The moment she'd seen the first red flag in Michael's behavior, she had paid him $10,000 to play the role of a lifetime. The marriage wasn't real. The prenup was a scrap of paper. Michael had emptied her father's bank accounts, but he hadn't touched the offshore trusts, the ones Sarah had moved to a blind foundation the week before the wedding. She pulled the truck over at a scenic overlook, the estate a tiny, burning ember in the distance. She picked up the burner phone, the real one, the one she'd hidden in the truck days ago, and dialed a number she'd memorized. Federal Bureau of Investigation, a voice answered. "My name is Sarah Johnson," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet cab. "I'd like to report a case of multi-state wire fraud, attempted murder, and a secret bloodline conspiracy involving Robert Davis. I have the ledgers, I have the recordings, and I have the bodies." She hung up and looked out at the horizon. The sun was beginning to peek over the Blue Ridge Mountains, a thin line of gold breaking the darkness. For the first time in 21 years, Sarah didn't reach for her notebook. She didn't count the steps. She didn't apologize for the space she took up in the world. She simply put the truck in gear and drove toward the light, leaving the ghosts of Charlottesville to freeze in the dark.